Well, it's mid-October, our hands are dirty, and today we're harvesting sweet potatoes. So anyone that's followed along with us for a while knows we do grow sweet potatoes. We took a hiatus from it for 1 year last year, and this year we were back at it again. Now, the one thing after some experimentation and growing them in different ways and growing different varieties and all that sort of fun stuff that you can go back through and see other videos about, we've settled on growing them in barrels. We find of all the methods that we've ever tried where we live, this is the best method for a couple of reasons. So before we get into showing any of this harvest and any of what we've got going on this year, I'm going to run through sort of a couple of reasons that I think the barrels, or these blue barrels that we use, are the best way to grow sweet potatoes, at least for us. So reason number one, they're contained. When we used to grow them in the ground, sweet potatoes are not as easy to harvest as normal potatoes, and when we used to grow them in the ground, it was really difficult to get them without breaking them off because they want to go deep. And so these containers, these barrels, contain them. So as you can see with this one, it went right to the bottom, grew at a 90-degree angle. So you can just imagine when you look at the size of this thing, if it was in the ground, it would be really hard to get out without breaking. So the next reason, we can control the soil mix. And that's one thing you're going to see as we get into this harvest. They break stuff down really well. To get them out of the barrels, we've got to shift things around, but we can always keep amending it, and we can give them sort of a pretty organic, but also a fairly light and fluffy soil as opposed to our heavier clay soil. And they really seem to respond to that. And the last big reason, and I think this might actually be maybe the most important, kind of tied up with the containing them a bit, but is moisture. One thing we find with these barrels is when we water, or if we have to water, they retain the moisture quite well. So we usually do mulch the top. So when they're young, that really helps a lot. But as they're growing, they're not wet because they do have drainage, but they kind of have a more uniform soil moisture than what we tend to get in either our wooden raised beds or in our actual sort of in-ground gardens. So there you go. There's sort of my three biggest reasons to grow sweet potatoes in these blue barrels. But you don't have to take my word for it, because next we're going to actually go and do the harvest, and we're going to show you sort of what we get. So sort of spoiler alert, you probably guessed from looking at the beginning of this video that we've already started the harvest. And as you can see here, this barrel shows really well what we were just talking about putting the mulch on top. This is just wood chips, just bedding we would use for the chickens or the sheep. And it's a pretty good layer, but this really keeps everything below it quite moist. Now we've had kind of a dry couple of weeks. We've had a little bit of rain, but not much. But this sort of, you can see there's still some moisture in there. Not a lot, but still a little bit. And that's exactly what you want. All right, so barrel number one is harvested. Now this barrel was overflowing with greens, but I think when we planted this, the parsley definitely shaded out these back ones. We found there wasn't a lot of tubers on the back couple flips that were planted, but still, I don't think that's too bad. It's a reasonable harvest. I mean, some of these are actually a pretty good size. So even though I did break this one off, which is not ideal, you do want to be careful with them when you're digging them up. You're definitely going to get your hands dirty doing it. Even though this is broken off, it will actually store reasonably well. We will use it before some of the other ones, but we still get months out of them as long as we get them cured well. So I've started on barrel number two, which is also a bit shaded, but it looks like the meadow voles have been in here. And as I've kind of moved some stuff back at the surface, I have a feeling there's not going to be a lot in this particular barrel, but we'll see. So this barrel is about knee height, and it was pretty much filled with soil. You can kind of see where the line was here. But this just gives you an idea of how deep these get. Like, I'm almost at the bottom of this barrel. In fact, no, not quite at the bottom, but I'm pretty darn close, and I still haven't been able to get this out.
It's probably curved and gone along the side.
It looks like it. I think.
Oh, did you break it?
I even still broke it off. But not a bad size at all. All right, so barrel number two is done, and it wasn't a bad harvest, but we definitely lost some to voles. They definitely got into this, even though it is fairly high. I'm sure they just climbed the vegetation. And yeah, I guess we'll show you what we got, and then we're going to move on to barrel number 3. Well, like I say, not a bad harvest. So this is barrel number 1, barrel number 2. I mean, look at this one. Some of the ones that did come out of barrel number 2 were a decent size. And I think the lesson learned here for us, even though we have done this before, is these barrels were too shaded. Even though they get sort of the south-facing direction, so you would think they would get a lot of light, I have a funny feeling this bit of vegetation growing behind them was enough to at least reduce the production at the back of the barrels. So
It'll be interesting to see what's in bucket number 3.
Which was more in the open.
Look at this one. Can we get it out without breaking it? That's the question. Don't break it. Oh, hold that up. Look at that.
It's a pretty nice one. Well, this little gray barrel is completely harvested. We've dug right to the bottom, and there's a few little rootlets and stuff in there, but there's nothing of any size. So one of our barrels is done, but wait until you see what we got out of this barrel.
And look what we have already in the tub. And Chris is still pulling them out of here. Still on the same tub like 15 minutes later, but very, very, it's not lucrative. What's the word?
Productive.
Productive indeed. Holy cow. At the end of this, we'll see if we can pick out a best one.
That's probably the biggest one so far, although I got to be careful with it because it's got a piece right here that will probably break pretty easily. But that's a big sweet potato.
Wow.
So here we go. There's our harvest, and a lot of
Out of the one barrel.
Out of the one barrel, and a lot of these are really good, nice-sized potatoes. I mean, sweet potatoes. This one's huge. This was only 5 slips that we put in this barrel, and I'm floored. We have never gotten such a good harvest. And the interesting part was these slips, if anybody was following along from the spring, came from sweet potato tubers that we had in storage for 2 years because we didn't plant them last year. So this is amazing. Now we're going to go on to the other barrels. Although it's not the focus of this video, I wanted to show this because these blue barrels are really good for a lot of other things. And one of the things that we really find grows exceptionally well in the blue barrels, even compared to our other raised beds and in the ground, is beets. They do awesome, and I really think, going back to my third sort of reason why these work so well for sweet potatoes, is the moisture regime. Because when you water these, during a drought or during a period where you're not getting a lot of rain, they keep that moisture better, and the beets definitely like it. Well, 3 barrels down and 3 more to go, but we have to switch gardens, so we're gonna go do that. Well, our next 3 barrels are over in our, what we call the new for 22 garden, and they're kind of right in front of me here. These were planted a little bit later. I could have even been 2 weeks later, I don't quite remember. So I'm curious, even though they look very lush, what they look like underneath. Now, one of these barrels, this one here, I'm really curious on because these are our purple sweet potatoes, and we thought we weren't going to get any, and we managed to get enough to plant 1 barrel. So let's get going and see what these are all like inside.
So once again, we are cutting back these greens, but have no fear, they're not going to be wasted. We're going to be feeding these to the rabbits. Yes, these do make human food as well, but because of that bit of a frosting they got last night, we're not going to be harvesting any of these, but we have been using them throughout the season in stir fries, things like that.
So first sweet potato out of barrel number 1 in this garden, and it's a really wonky shape, but it's pretty big.
It's lovely.
So it might not be so bad over here. They might have got enough sun, I don't know.
So Chris says, look at this one, we should film this one. So that's what we're going to do.
This one.
Oh my. Look at the size of it.
That's quite odd shaped, but that's a big sweet potato.
That is a huge sweet potato.
Okay, so barrel number 1 over here, so this is actually number
4.
4, is harvested. Now, it's not as big of a harvest, and the interesting part with this is these barrels are pretty new. We actually put horse manure and whatnot into them last fall. They sat over winter, so they're pretty fresh compared to the barrels on the other side, and the roots just didn't go deep. This was only 3 slips in this particular one, so there wasn't very many. And I don't know, when I look at it, that's pretty impressive for only 3. So one thing that was interesting with these, and I've kind of broken them up a bit now, but they all grew very clumpy. These are the exact same type of sweet potato as what was in the other bed. So it just goes to show you that different growing conditions, different growth habits. So now I've already put the soil back in, and we're definitely going to have to top this up again because the one thing about the barrels is they tend to compost down a bit, which makes good soil. But you can see there's a lot more organic matter. Now the wood chips were the mulch on top, but the soil itself is it's not holding the form quite as much as the other stuff, but it's got a lot more organics in it. These also had a lot more worms in them, whereas the other beds were pretty much devoid. So interesting, to say the least. I'm almost done harvesting from this barrel, which is the last orange potato barrel, or the sweet potato barrel. And I'm going to lift this out to show you sort of how these grew. But one thing that I noticed that I didn't even pay attention to when we did this back in the spring was I mulched these really heavy, like a mulch layer like that is what I was pulling off. And they seem to have really liked that in conjunction with the more organic nature of the soil that's in here. So I don't know. Looking at this versus the very first and second barrel we did, I think we might have a bit of a secret here on growing better sweet potatoes. But watch this.
Ooh.
You can see how compact these grew. All in all, not bad. This has been a pretty good harvest for these orange sweet potatoes. Now I really want to see what do the purple ones look like.
So there is the harvest from these 2 barrels. That's incredible. That's more than we used to get from our whole harvest in a year. So I guess we're eating lots of sweet potatoes this year.
All right, so this I'm really excited for, although I have noticed, I think there's been a chipmunk in here. So we'll see if they've chewed on any of these tubers or not. But these are our purple sweet potatoes. And long story short, these are even better for us than all the orange ones. So while we have a huge orange sweet potato harvest this year, we're really hoping this barrel produced so that we can propagate and have a bigger harvest of these purple ones next year.
Here comes the moment of truth.
Look at the layer of mulch I put on top.
Don't break them. Oh, you broke it.
I broke it, but you can see there, they're quite purple on the inside.
The looser soil definitely, oh my gosh, definitely seems to help. Oh, look at that.
Not bad at all.
We've never grown them to look like that before.
Definitely went a lot deeper, but I'm pretty impressed so far. Well, there we go. 3 more barrels harvested, and yeah, what's sitting in front of me here is what we got, and I'm pretty impressed. I mean, compared to the orange, the purple does look a little weak, but considering that came back from the brink of oblivion in our cupboard, I'm pretty impressed with that because we'll be able to clone some of these and we'll still be able to eat some this year. So all in all, pretty awesome so far. Well, that concludes our sweet potato harvest and sort of discussion on why we like raising them in barrels. I think looking around me here, it's pretty obvious it works. And it can work on a small scale. And I mean, that was only 6 blue barrels. And I don't know, we haven't weighed it yet because we're going to keep them in the greenhouse. It's not quite warm enough in here to really cure them properly, but we're still going to let them dry for a bit because tonight it's 10 degrees. In here they will be more than fine. And then eventually we'll get them into storage, and then we'll actually see how many pounds of sweet potatoes did we end up with. But regardless of the poundage, sweet potatoes can definitely be something useful in a garden at home. And it's pretty simple and it's pretty productive. So anyways, give it a try if you get the chance. And if you do decide to grow sweet potatoes, I highly recommend growing them in barrels.
And I'm coming in at the end with a little bit of fascinating math, or at least fascinating math to me. Now I'm going to estimate that those barrels are 2 foot by 2 foot square. They're not actually, so you're not getting 4 square foot of space to grow, but those 6 barrels was only 24 square feet in total. and it created all of these sweet potatoes. And that is an excellent use of space.